Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar on Is the DJI Matrice 200 Series right for my company? At the end of the webinar, we'll be doing a Q&A session, and we'd be happy to answer any questions at that time. So please feel free to submit your questions in the chat section on your screen. Also, we'll be sending everyone a copy of the slides as well as a recording of the webinar. So today's speakers are Jack McIntosh and Colin Romberger. Jack holds a private pilot certificate with an instrument rating, has a bachelor's in business administration, as well as a master's in manufacturing technology. Colin holds multiple FAA airman certificates for manned aircraft operations, has a master's in unmanned aircraft systems with a focus in flight operations and systems design from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, and he now runs a drone services company focusing on mapping and inspections. So Colin will take over and we'll get started.
Okay, great. Thanks, Alicia. We'll do a quick sound check. And Alicia, can you hear me coming through just fine?
Yep.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, just wanted to check and make sure. Well, greetings everyone, and thanks for hopping on today. So we're going to take some time and introduce you to the DJI Matrice 200 series. This is a very popular aircraft system, very highly anticipated in its release. So we're anxious to share some things about it with you and answer some of your questions. As you saw from the previous slide that Alicia passed us through, this aircraft system was designed purely for the industrial or true commercial space when it comes to unmanned aircraft. So it was designed from the ground up to withstand a lot of the rigors and a lot of the environmental hazards that can often be faced in a lot of the more challenging job sites, especially again looking at those really industrial applications. So we're going to jump in, and you can see from our slide right here that there are three variants of the Matrice 200 series, and we want to run you through each of those variants. Before we jump on to the next slide, though, just a little bit of background on the Matrice series. DJI has actually been producing Matrice models for a little while at this point. However, up until the release of the M200 class, all of the previous Matrice models were, really kind of initially development based. They weren't really the type of aircraft that you would pull out of the box and just start flying. Most of them required either some assembly, some heavy assembly at times, or some customizations with the different internal avionics and things like that based on your intended use case. So now we have, they took what they did with the original M100 and M600 series and they kind of polished it off to make it a much more out of the box type of product that can perform in these more demanding environments. So let's jump in and we'll look at the variants here first. So some general specs on the overall class, and we'll kind of touch on a few things within here as we go. Across the board, the average max gross weight for these systems, it's about 13 pounds, and that will vary slightly depending on whether or not you're using the M200 or the M210 with some of its additional capabilities. Max speed on the system in its standard positioning mode, 40 miles an hour. Max flight time is 38 minutes. However, this is with the high capacity batteries, so running two high capacity batteries, not the standard batteries that come with it. With the standard batteries, it's a little bit less. You're kind of comparable to like a Phantom 4 Pro, something like that, in the 25 to 30 minute range. In terms of altitude, we're talking density altitudes, so basically, as the air gets thinner and we get higher, these aircraft can perform at altitudes up to 10,000 feet above sea level. Obviously, with regulations, we're not taking them that high, but if you do work in mountainous environments, things like that, they will perform at those higher elevations, same way that they perform closer to sea level. Temperature range is, fairly close to what we've seen with a lot of other DJI models, although they are telling us that the system is designed to withstand some colder temperatures without as much loss in flight times that we saw with some of the other models. So rated down to -4 degrees Fahrenheit up to 113 degrees Fahrenheit. So again, putting in a little bit more cushion for those demanding temperature conditions. Vision positioning system is standard, as with all of the current DJI models for the most part. So we have both our downward facing sensors to help with low-level hovers in non-GPS areas. We also have our vision camera-based systems, as well as some other obstacle detection and avoidance capabilities that we'll touch on when we get to the different variants. So looking at the base model, which is the Matrice 200 or the M200, this was the first model that was released. DJI had announced all three of them, but the first one to actually make it through production and become available for order was the Matrice 200. With this particular platform, it is capable of carrying just a single payload, a single imaging payload in the form of a camera. It does not have the dual capability that we'll talk about in a little bit. However, in addition to the gimbaled camera, which would be your main imaging payload, it also does feature a FPV camera, dedicated FPV camera, so that if you are using a separate individual to operate that camera system, and you're using a dual controller setup, the pilot and what they're going to see on their flight display will be just what's coming straight off of that FPV camera, so they don't have to worry about what their payload operator is doing as they're moving that camera around. Their perspective will still stay right in front of the aircraft, which, if anyone has any experience with the original Inspires or the M100s, any others, you know that you did not have that capability. You basically, if you were the pilot, you saw whatever your camera operator was looking at, and that was something you had to keep track of. The system does use dual batteries. So it does use two batteries to get the max flight times. There are two types of batteries available. There's a standard capacity battery and then a high capacity battery. The price of the high capacity does go up significantly. I believe they run, and we can have Jack confirm this for us later if need be, but I believe they're running about $360 a piece for the high capacity, and the standards are somewhere around 200 right now. So a bit of a price difference. And just like all the DJI aircraft, runs off of the DJI Go 4.0 application, and runs all of the standard autonomous flight modes that DJI has been putting out for a while. So there are some modes that are available on other aircraft that may not be on this one, and vice versa, but it does still have its full complement. And again, the beauty of the M200 class now is that we have all of the refinements that we've come to know from DJI as far as that user interface and just ease of operations. So moving on now to the M210. They've added some additional capabilities for us. So now we have our dual camera capabilities. So in terms of that downward configuration, we can utilize both a thermal imaging camera in the form of the ZenMuse XT as a plug-and-play solution, as well as any of the visual cameras from the new ZenMuse S series or the which is their long-range zoom camera. The other big addition when we get up to the M210 class is the fact that DJI is now incorporating ADS-B transceivers on board these aircraft. They're calling this DJI AirSense. For those of you that are not familiar with what ADS-B means, it's the system that the FAA is switching to basically replace a radar-based air traffic control system. So with ADS-B, everything will be satellite-based through the GPS satellite network, and aircraft that have these ADS-B transceivers will be able to both broadcast their location as well as receive information from other receivers in the area. So very beneficial when we think about things like getting to the point where we can fly beyond visual line of sight, and addressing some of the FAA's concerns as far as sense and avoid, because now we'll have a flight display that will show us where other aircraft are around our aircraft, and also in the cockpits of those manned aircraft, they will be able to see if they have the proper avionics where our unmanned aircraft are in relation to their flight. So really going a long way to help with that particular hurdle that I know has been holding some things back from the regulatory side of things. Also, when you get up to the M210, they change the control station, the ground control unit, and now the Ascendance ground control unit becomes the standard for the M210 and the M210 RTK, which we'll see here in a minute. One other note that I did not mention when we talked about the 200, but it applies to all of them, and again showing how these aircraft were made for more demanding conditions. They are all rated by DJI to be water resistant. They are not waterproof, but they are rated to be water resistant, and the DJI will cover them under warranty if they are flown in cases of precipitation, as long as they fall within the thresholds as far as the amount of precipitation that's coming down. So let's go ahead and we'll move on now to the 210 RTK. So with the RTK, now we're taking one more step up. So all the features of the 210, so we still have the ability to have the dual downward cameras or the single top mounted camera if that is a desired item for different inspection applications. And we're also adding in the real-time kinematic or RTK system. Now DJI's RTK systems were initially developed mainly to help prevent certain types of interference around areas where we have high levels of electromagnetic interference and things like that, because basically it takes the onboard GPS and magnetometer out of the equation and does all of the aircraft's positioning based off of a ground station that is picking up the GPS signals. It's a differential GPS, much like you would use in surveying, and then the two added antennas now that you see on the RTK, that is what the system will use to determine the orientation and position of the aircraft at a much more accurate level. So since it's only going from the ground to the aircraft as opposed to all of the satellites up in orbit and connecting down to its position flying around. This gives it very enhanced positioning accuracy. When you see an aircraft flying with RTK next to an aircraft of similar specs without the RTK enabled, there is a definite difference. You will notice that the non-RTK aircraft will usually fluctuate around, usually within about a foot or so, sometimes more depending on capabilities. But when the RTK system is enabled, everything is really shored up, and if anything, you might notice maybe a couple inch variations one way or the other, even when wind conditions start getting fairly heavy. So it is great performance, and really depending on the environments where you're flying, or if you do want to use it to help with positioning accuracy in terms of mapping applications with post-processing data, very good for that. The reason that it's able to resist this interference is because once we switch over to the RTK system, one of the reasons anyway is that now our data link is going to be transmitted over a separate frequency. So now we're dropping down to 900 megahertz as opposed to 2.4 gigahertz or 5.8. So that also helps with other types of interference in certain areas as well. So moving on then from there, just to kind of put things into perspective with some of the other popular DJI aircraft that you may have some experience with already. Looking here from the Phantom perspective, 25 to 30-minute flight times, up to 4 kilometers in terms of the range. Actually, that's actually a 7-kilometer range and 4 miles is what DJI states for the Phantom there. Price point, for the cheap ones, you're still around that $500 mark, all the way up to about $1,500 for the Phantom 4 Pro. The Inspire, we have obviously now two versions of the Inspire. The original Inspire will still accept the visual payloads as well as the Zenmuse XT thermal camera. However, the original version had much reduced flight times. Usually your max flight times, you're only looking at about 12 to maybe 15 minutes that you'd be able to get out of it. Still had the same range, the 7 kilometers. With the original Inspire was more like 6 kilometers, something like that. But now the Inspire 2 has that additional range, the additional mile. Not that that really becomes an issue at any point in time anyway. But the one thing to consider with the Inspire 2 is that DJI has told us they will not modify it, and it was not designed to support thermal imaging. So if you intend to use a Zenmuse XT, or you intend to do thermal imaging with your your platform, the Inspire 2 will not work for you as a result of that. And then finally, again, in response to that demand and the increased demand for a more heavy-duty platform, able to be used right out of the box in these demanding conditions, these industrial scenarios, we have the M200 series. So this is really the way that DJI wants to push people that are looking at, again, the commercial, the industrial applications. They do not want you to try and go with the Inspire 2 because, as we said, it will not have those full payload capabilities. They really just want that to be for cinematography at this point. The range and the specs is again the same, 7 kilometers or about 4 miles. Price points for the M200 will start at about 5,300, and then for the M210 you're going to be looking at around 8,000, and then the 210 RTK you're getting up into the teens. And Jack can also speak to that from his role as an enterprise dealer for DJI. But we'll go ahead and keep rolling through. So in terms of the sensors on the aircraft, and this is would apply for all of them, they are equipped with more than 20 different internal sensors. Now this includes your GPS receivers, your various IMU units with their redundancies, but also your proximity sensors. So we have vision sensors, forward facing camera sensors for obstacle detection. We also have our vision positioning unit underneath that consists of both cameras as well as ultrasonic emitters to verify altitudes at low levels. And then we also have infrared sensor capabilities on the top of the aircraft to prevent collisions if you were to climb up into an overhead obstacle or obstruction. They put the infrared on there to prevent those types of mishaps. Looking then at our payloads, I believe is our next slide. Yeah, our camera models. So in terms of the models that are supported, all of the current S series of cameras, so all of the visual cameras that were designed for the Inspire 2, will also work on the Matrice series. The only thing that will not work on the Inspire 2, as we mentioned, is the ZenMuse XT. The ZenMuse XT, the thermal camera, will function on the Matrice models. However, you do need an adapter for that to be able to work, to be able to connect and modify that signal so that everything works the way that it should. So those adapters are available. They're relatively inexpensive, right around $100. So lots of different camera options. We do have zoom capable models, the Z30 that can take us all the way up to 30-time optical zoom, which is very impressive, but also very expensive, or the zoom capability that we can get through the X5S by adding the right type of lens to that particular camera. And I believe that wraps us up as far as specs. So Alicia, I'll pass it over to Jack, and he can talk to us about some use cases.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to talk to you about some of the uses that I've actually been a part of, and some of the clientele that we've delivered to, and some of the things they've used them for, and some of the advanced capabilities that even are out there that have not been used yet. To clarify on the Thermal XT, you can use the existing XT camera if you happen to have one. It just needs to be sent back to DJI in a firmware update to a version 2. All the new XT cameras that are coming from DJI already have the version 2 firmware. So if you do happen to have one, you can use it, just has to be upgraded. So mapping and modeling through photogrammetry can obviously be done either with the X4S camera, which is the mechanical shutter, or the X5S. The experience that we get with the company I work with, we're getting 1 to 2 centimeters horizontally accuracy and 3 to 4 centimeters vertical. Very stable aircraft, easy to fly, easy to deploy. It's very quick out of the box, ready to get it up and going. From the mapping and modeling, then we run into the next use cases. The agriculture. You can use it for the crop scouting. One of the things that you can do with this, because it's such a robust airframe, is you can add the NIR from either MicroSense or any other manufacturer out there. It can hold those. There are some mounting options for that, so you can actually do the NDVI data to get the soil analysis, the plant analysis for the different functions. So it's a very capable aircraft in the agriculture market. For the inspections, it's extremely useful because you have the variety of camera positions, both the 2 downward and the 1 up. Just to clarify, you can't run all 3 at the same time. It's either 2 down or 1 up. But from an inspection standpoint, when you add the RGB camera with the thermal camera, now you have a comparison model, which has been asked for quite some time in the inspection industry. Now you don't have to go back and fly it twice. You can fly whatever the application, whether it be a power line or the wind turbine. In this instance, you can do an inspection both on the props, blades, as well as any exterior heat that's generated from potential bearing failures or connection failures. Can be all done one single flight with both cameras at the same time. On the next slide, we're talking about the power line, which very useful. Again, you can do the RGB with the thermal. Been asked for quite some time in this industry, because when you fly this, they may see with a thermal, you can see the area where it's generating a lot of heat, but sometimes you can't see exactly which insulator it's coming from or which connection is coming from. With the RGB camera, it's real easy to narrow it down. Very cost effective to send it out. If you're running down a corridor with the power lines and you're worried about the interference with the lines themselves, there's 2 ways to kind of to make it a lot safer. One way is to use the Z30 camera, because you can then be further away and not worry about the interference and still get excellent quality photos. Or the RTK model ensures that your controllability around those power lines is retained when you get closer. So it does help on cell phone towers and power lines with the RTK model. So on the bridge inspections, very useful. Upward facing camera gets you up underneath of those. Again, the RTK model, it does help considerably when you go into those GPS denied areas where you're underneath of a bridge embankment or overpass. But you can mount either the Z30 camera or the X4S, the X5S, any of those, even the thermal, on the upward facing gimbal. Do your inspection, not worry about the drone itself being in part of the photo or the inspection area. Very useful in this. It's one of the first on the market to be able to do that. On the solar panel inspection, again, being able to go out there in a big solar field and know exactly which panels may have defects and narrow it down. Again, using just the infrared is very valuable, but throwing in the fact that you can use the RGB alongside of it really narrows down exactly where you're talking. One of the most asked options prior to this coming out was the ability to have dual cameras, and they've really done a great job of marrying the two together and them working very, very well together. On the search and rescue, take into consideration that it's weather resistance, get you out there in the worst of conditions. Usually search and rescue is done when the weather is not so good. It's been asked for, since it's been used for search and rescue, the number one question was, when are we going to get one that's weather resistant? And DJI answered that with this model. And also, if you get just the M200, excellent choice. However, again, in search and rescue, a lot of times that thermal camera is the difference between locating someone and not locating them. Then having the RGB camera to take an actual photo of the exact area really helps. But having the infrared camera at night flying with your nighttime waiver, of course, you would be able to see someone in complete darkness. It works extremely well. We've delivered several of these to both law enforcement, fire, and the emergency management companies around and agencies around several states. It's very well received. The flight time, the ease of use, and the quick deployment all lends itself to being a very successful in the search and rescue field. Firefighting, again, very, very useful. You can get it up. There's some use cases that I know in particular that the unit is used to locate the hot spots prior to anyone going in. It can back up, fly the area, monitor it as they're fighting the structure, keep people from entering into a very hazardous situation. I know one agency that has actually, with a thermal camera on it, they were able, it had enough payload capacity left that they actually put a small tool bag on the bottom and flew it up to a couple firefighters on the roof, so that they didn't have to carry the bag with them up the ladder. So several different uses, very useful again in adverse conditions, because we can't pick when there's going to be a fire, and with the 200 line, you can fly it just about in any condition. They also have, I don't remember Colin mentioning, they do have the battery heaters that if it is in really cold weather, it does automatically heat the batteries. So it lengthens your flight time in those adverse conditions where some of the other models do not. So it's an excellent aircraft in that aspect.
Great, thank you, Jack and Colin. I did want to mention at Dart Drones, we do have a Matrice flight training course. So we're offering that in 3 cities right now, Dallas, Boston, and Denver. And also, if you sign up for that course by February 16th, you can get $100 off with the code webinar100. So we really encourage everyone to take advantage of that. And now we will move into our Q&A session. So we did get a few questions. The first one, Colin and Jack, whoever wants to answer this, was how is battery life improved with high capacity batteries?
From the spec standpoint anyway, I would say significantly. When you look at some of the configuration options, especially once you start getting up into the M210 and the M210 RTK, standard batteries in some cases are actually only giving you flight times around the 20-minute mark, and some configurations even a little bit less. Whereas with the high capacity, you're normally able to stick up around that, high 20s, low 30s, even with everything fully loaded, and with many of the variants still being able to get up towards 40. But Jack, anything that you want to add to that one?
Yeah, there's a drastic difference from the standard to the high capacity, depending on the configuration. But if you do apples to apples, the same sensor load, considerable. We're getting on average almost a full 10 minutes difference. You will see that they do recommend when you go to the Z30 camera that you use high capacity batteries, more from a weight and balance standpoint, because of the weight of the Z30. The high capacity batteries then help offset that on the weight and balance. But yes, the high capacity batteries are well worth the money. And you were right, Colin, they are around that list price of about $369 for those batteries. So they're expensive, but you get what you pay for on those. They're both wider and a little longer physically on the size, and they do really, really work well.
Great. Another question. The Matrice is weatherproof, but are the cameras?
Cameras are not. However, in talking to several people and then DJI themselves, they will tell you that if you do your due diligence on the way you fly and take care of the camera, if you mount it on the underside and do a little due diligence to protect it, then you can find those adverse conditions with those cameras, depending on which model that you use. I have even seen someone that has taken a Ziploc bag and kind of went around the camera, leaving the camera lens open. You want to allow for some ventilation for it to breathe, but I have seen that. It does help protect it on the underside as long as it's not just a complete downpour. I wouldn't recommend putting it on the top of the unit and fly it in really nasty weather.
And one other thing I'll add to that too, make sure that you verify the DJI's information about its weather resistant capabilities. They will not use the word proof when they talk about the weather conditions. It is definitely weather resistant, and they actually have some very specific scales when it comes to how they measure the amount of rainfall that you're experiencing, that they say excuse me, that they will honor the warranty up to those conditions. But if it goes beyond that, so if the rain gets heavier, things like that, that would go beyond what they're saying it is capable of doing. So
Okay, another question. Is it possible to update the Matrice 200 into the functionalities of the 210 if you already have the 200? Are they compatible?
No, I have specifically asked that question to DJI, and at this time, they will not allow you to add any additional cameras, the mounts for the cameras and or the RTK function.
Yeah, the image transmission system is a little bit different with supporting those the dual setup, and that's really what would need to be swapped out. And that's not something that's a modular component. It's basically taking out an entire internal component of the aircraft and replacing it with something else, which would also mean that other circuitry would have to be replaced and things as well. From a compatibility standpoint and getting everything to talk to each other the right way. So yeah, right there, as Jack said, he's asked the question already, and we're disappointed too, but it's the way it is right now.
Great. Can the M210 be upgraded to the RTK?
Again, to my knowledge, no. Unless something changes in the future. Right now, again, it's an internal, the internal electronics that allow the RTK system. That is not in either the 200 or the 210.
Okay, great. Are there any payload carrying products available for the M200 series?
So Jack might be able to speak about specific things that are available, but there are a lot of payload solutions out there that are kind of universal in design and made to work with retractable landing gear multi-rotors. And if you've seen retractable landing gear multi-rotor platforms out there, obviously the Inspire is a little unique with its design, but most of the others that you see are this, T-leg style, the skids that you see with the 210 or the 200 series in general. And there are a lot of very basic models that basically involve just having two interlocking hooks. So one that mounts on either leg, and then when the landing gear are down, those hooks are crossed, and you can clip a carabiner or something like that on there. And then when you raise the landing gear, those hooks separate, and then whatever's underneath will fall. So I would imagine some of those systems would probably work. But Jack, if you know of any specific models that you guys work with that you can share, that'd be great.
Yeah, I don't have any specific. What the fire department that I spoke of earlier, they just basically tied a rope onto the skid system and hauled it up that way. You can adapt some of the others that are made for the retractable landing gear units. Just keep in mind that it doesn't have the lift capacity as say as a M600 does. The lighter that the sensor that you put on, the more payload obviously that you can do. It is a pretty robust aircraft, and I want to go back and mention about the batteries just so that everybody's clear. The Matrice 200 comes with one set of the regular standard battery. The 210 comes with one set of the regular capacity and one set of the high capacity. So you get a set of each with the 210 in addition. So.
All right, great. And then again, our last question. Someone said, was thinking about the integration of the Matrice 200, 210 with other not DJI cameras. Is it feasible to integrate with an infrared camera like the Red Edge from MechaSense?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
what
Jack.
I
Yep, go ahead,
yeah,
Jack. Sorry, I was gonna say I think you touched on that one.
yeah, what I understand is MicroSense is working on that. They've already incorporated that into the Inspire, um, and the other models. Um, there's another company out there too, Centera, that actually has a gimbal mount um, NIR camera that they're working on trying to build a model for the 200 series. It's a different connection. If anybody's familiar, there's a the connection of the camera is different. That's why you need an adapter for the XT. So that's what they're trying to work out for their gimbal camera. So my understanding is yes, there's some companies out there that are working hard to get that.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, Colin and Jack, and thank you everyone for joining us today for this webinar. If anyone has any questions at all, please feel free to visit our website, call us, email us. We would be happy to answer any questions. And also definitely take advantage of that webinar 100 discount if you are interested in Matrice specific training. And again, I will be sending out a full copy of the slide deck as well as a recording of this whole webinar. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye bye.